will go ahead and introduce myself for those of you who haven't worked with me yet. My name is Kim Beeson, and I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Faculty and Academic Affairs. And I'm here to represent the Office of the VPFAA. We work as a unit, and so if you ever have a question, you can't remember my name, just send an email to vpfaa@indiana.edu, and we will make sure you get a response and make sure that comes in a timely manner. We have various portfolios so that we can make sure you have a chance to get consultation and advice in different ways that are secure and confidential. And in terms of promotion, what I do is advise on promotion cases because I sit on the campus tenure committee as the liaison between the executive level of review and the campus committee. So what that means is that all of my influence happens on tenure cases. None of it happens on promotion cases. So as far as promotion is concerned, you can consult with me confidentially. I can help you strategize. We can have a conversation about which things are strong and weak about your case, and no one else in my office will know the details of that until they see the dossier moving through a formal process. And we do that on purpose so that you have both a place for advice and a place for formal fresh eye review. And so if you ever have any question about who to talk to, it's also fine. Everyone in our office understands the rules of engagement, and so we'll make sure you get to the right person. Don't hesitate to ask. What I hope to do is talk very briefly, and I'm going to look at my watch to make sure I stay on track, about the promotion process, specifically as it relates to criteria. But then after I finish my remarks, you're welcome to ask any question about the whatever aspect of the process you'd like. What I hope, the ultimate goal of this series of workshops and other initiatives is to demystify the process, to make sure you understand exactly how promotion moves through from your unit up through the campus level and the kinds of things that we're looking at when it gets further away from your local unit. So maybe the most important thing to understand is that it's a multi-level review. That means fresh eyes see your dossier at several different steps. And it's important to understand that they are fresh eyes. There are not people who know you personally by the time you get further down the road. When you're on a campus committee, you're a forced recusal. If you're in the College of Arts and Sciences and it's someone in your own department, and if you're in any other school and it's someone else from your school, you don't even participate in the conversation. So they really are fresh eyes, and they're trained to look at the dossier. I've outlined the steps because I think sometimes that's not clear. I'm sorry, I am on the promotion planning is page 1. It's hard to tell which one. There's a heading on each side of the page, but we're talking about demystifying the process and how dossiers move through from your unit to campus. So you probably are familiar with what happens in your own unit, whether that's a school or a department, depending on how it's set up. But from there, it might become a little bit of a mystery. So what I've done is outline the process. If you are in a department, and we use unit because sometimes these are programs and sometimes these are institutes, but if there is a level of review there, there's often a subcommittee. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 people, and then it will go to all of the eligible voters in that unit. From there, it will move to the school committee, and everyone, if you didn't have a unit committee, you will have a school committee. This is true for everyone. It moves to the school, and then to the dean, and then to the campus committee, and then on to executive level of review. The vice provost, the president, the trustees will all see the dossier further down the road. So I've outlined that just so that it's clear how many people are looking at the dossier, none of whom are having conversations with the previous review level. So they'll take all of the information that's in the dossier, which will include the vote record and reports from each of the previous levels of review, and they'll take a fresh look at the materials in the dossier and make their own independent evaluation. That moves us to evaluation of the dossier. And it's important to know that at each of those levels of review, people are trained to look at the dossier. Not the person, not all of the noise around the dossier, but the actual dossier, what's in that dossier. It will include materials you create to showcase your accomplishments in rank, to showcase how you've had an impact, and how you've met the criteria for your unit, your school, and for the campus level. And as it moves through each level, the dossier has new documents, right? There's a committee report at each level, there's a vote record, but the conversations that happen in the evaluation are not shared from one level to the other. So it really is the dossier itself that's being evaluated. And that's really nice to know because it means you're in control of what people see and how they interpret your career. You write the statement, you choose which documents best showcase your impact. And a lot of what we try and do in our office is help you put the very best face forward when you're creating your dossier, when you're linking your narrative to the criteria, so that people see what you want them to see when they look at your body of work and rank. Backing up a bit, there are 4 different avenues for promotion. You may go up for excellence in one of 3 areas or a balance case, and those are each described here, but I'll describe them as well. The most common avenue is excellence in research, which also requires that you be effective in teaching and satisfactory in service. However, with those 3 areas of review, you can also go up for excellence in either of the other 2, requiring satisfactory or effective in the remaining areas. So you could, for example, present excellence in service. You would then need to be at least effective in teaching and satisfactory in research. So those combinations can play out. They play out in the same way. You'd be excellent in one, and you meet the minimum criteria for effectiveness or satisfactory in the other 2 areas. There's also a balance case, which requires that you reach a level of very good in all 3 areas. The premise behind this, and I've given you the exact policy language, is that someone who's achieved very good in all 3 of those areas has contributed in an equivalent, a comparable way to someone who's excellent in one area and satisfactory in the other 2. So we can talk a little bit about what a strong balance case looks like. I will say that for tenure, it's not a very common path, precisely because to reach very good in service or teaching takes a lot of time. To show impact in service is really hard to do in 4 years. So it's not so much that it's not a recognized path, it's just a really, really high bar. However, for promotion, this becomes, for many people, a really likely way to showcase how your efforts relate to one another and have a cumulative impact together. And so we can talk about how to make that compelling argument. But what I've given you here is specifically the policy language showing that all 4 of these avenues are possible. The remaining half of what I'd like to talk about has to do with the actual language of the criteria. So we've switched to the second page of this, and I've broken this into steps. Essentially, if you're deciding whether or not it's time to go up for promotion, but also if you're planning your path toward promotion, these are the considerations that you'll want to start with. Of course, the sooner you start, the easier it is to plan. But even if it's a last moment check, this is your checklist. This is exactly what we hope you'll look at. The first important step is to know the criteria. For tenure, whatever you are hired with is the criteria you can choose to go up under, but that's not true for promotion. For promotion, it's the criteria in place at the moment you decide to go up. And we can talk about when the process officially begins. It's not, the idea is not that your department can change it in July when the letters have already been solicited, but to the extent that's reasonable, if there is a policy change and the criteria are revised, those will be the criteria that you are responsible for when you choose to go up for promotion. And actually, we are working right now, I believe the Bloomington Faculty Council will present a new version of the criteria. They are not brand new. The intent is to clarify what very good means and to give a more specific idea of what excellence in teaching would look like or excellence in service. Because if we look at the existing criteria, there are some gaps in terms of wanting clear information about what it means to be excellent in one of the other 2 areas. So that's the work that's being done right now. And it moves through several committees and then to the Bloomington Faculty Council. So they could at any point decide we don't want to look at this, but I doubt that will happen. But in terms of the ultimate form it takes, that's still in the works. So stay tuned. And in light of that, what I've done is give you the way to follow links to check the criteria as opposed to a link to a particular document. And this is on purpose, so that if you pull this out 3 years from now, something like this should still get you to the right place. Your, from the VPFAA website, you'll always be able to find the campus criteria. And there's also a place where you can click for schools. Now, when you click on the schools, all of the schools have their criteria except for the College of Arts and Sciences, which takes you directly to a list of departments. So you hop a step through that web interface. If you want to see the college criteria for tenure promotion, you go to the college website, and then there's at the very, very bottom, because prospective students aren't interested in these details, there's a link to enter into the faculty intranet, and it's password controlled. It will take you to all of the policy documents. So it's there, and if you try and can't find it, just let us know. We're happy to help you locate those. What you'll find when you look at the criteria, for the most part, is that they are increasing in specificity, but not contradictory. So you'll see mention of reputation or impact at the campus level, but the campus level won't dictate, for example, what the appropriate mode of production and research is. It won't dictate a particular index. It won't require a particular type of funding, and that's because it's intended to cover all of the faculty on the Bloomington campus, and it needs to be generalizable from one area to another. As you move into the school and into the unit, you'll find that there are certain markers that are designated as the most important. You'll also find guidance on things like when a book is a book. So, because if you're in a book-driven field and it says you must have a book, then it becomes a conversation about, well, how do I know this is a book? Is that a fact that I have a draft ready to send out to the readers sufficient? The answer is no. So there are really clear details, definitely at the level of the school, and then even more so in many of the units about when a book becomes a book. You'll find that level of specificity as you move from the campus criteria through the unit. But again, they shouldn't contradict each other. It just gives you increasing detail. The next step is to take a look at those criteria and see how you're doing. Have you met them? Now, the campus criteria ask, have you had enough impact to be recognized nationally or internationally? That's a pretty broad statement. So what you need to do is then contextualize that requirement within your own field of work. So good ways to do this. Perhaps there are models in your field, and you can take a look to see what those people had when they went up for promotion. So think of the very best people in your field. Where are they publishing? What kinds of funding were they expected to have? You always need to take into account the difference between institutions and the difference between your assigned duties. Those things matter, but it gives you a sense, if you're in a particular field and you look at the very best people in that field and every single one of them has 2 publications in a particular journal, chances are that's a really good journal to try and hit to show that you are communicating with the people in your field, that you're creating high impact research. So that's a very specific example, but it's an example of the kinds of things that you can find by looking outside to leaders in your field. You can also look within your unit. What do the recent promotion cases look like? What kinds of work have people contributed, and how have they measured it? You can look across campus. If you participate in school committees or campus committees, you may be able to get a generalized sense of what it looks like to have impact in a particular area. This is especially useful in teaching and service because I think you can see comparability across units. In general, the idea is to show how your footprint extends beyond yourself, your own classroom, your own unit if we're talking about service, and your own publications. Who's reading them? Who's noticing? Who's paying attention to your work? So in that sense, if you can think of this as a way to show expansion of your footprint since tenure, and that people are noticing and gaining something from your work. And if you can take that broad guidance and then interpret it into what you've done, it helps you plan and it helps you document the kinds of accomplishments that you've made. I've included here the college criteria and art histories criteria just to give you a sense of how they become increasingly specific if you're in the Department of Art History, by the time you get to that criteria, it's fairly clear. You need a book and it needs to be of a certain stature or equivalent publications, and it's mapped out fairly clearly. So if you get to the point where you look at the criteria and you can't really tell what it means or how to interpret it, that's when communication is a really good idea. And I would say ask early and often. I wouldn't walk away with the right answer, because chairs change over time, committees change over time. So it's, and you don't have to take anyone's advice, but it is helpful to know how different people are considering this kind of progress. And finally, step 3, if you think you're ready to go, and even if you're not so sure, it's very important to understand your unit internal timeline, because this is where there's quite a bit of variability, and our office will not be able to tell you with any degree of certainty, in April you must do this. What I can tell you, generally speaking, is that most units pre-promotion have a pre-promotion review. Sometimes this is an annual review that happens for everyone. Sometimes it's only upon request, and sometimes it's a different kind of review from the annual review, only upon request, or when someone else says, I think it's time for you to go up for promotion. So know how that works in your unit, and know it before you need to know it, so that you can be working on getting those materials together. Some units will tell you specifically, a dossier for this kind of review should include the following. My unit has a lot of detail, and so you can look and you can see that a dossier for a pre-promotion review should include these 5 items. It's easy enough to follow the instructions, but in other units it's not that clear, and so it's worth asking and understanding. Usually that review gives you some feedback about how your senior colleagues feel regarding your whether you're ready or not for promotion. From there, generally, it will go to a point where you can decide whether you want to go ahead or not. And I want to say this very clearly. You decide. You can decide against the advice of others if that's a reasonable decision. You can come see us if you don't like the advice of others, and we can talk about it together and see whether waiting a year will change the face of your possibilities. So we can have these conversations. At the end of the day, you decide. And then your chair will work with you and your department to solicit lists of letter writers, and the process begins. Usually you want to know who your letter writers will be around April, and then you want to have all of your materials ready to go out by the end of the spring semester. There's a deadline in the college that I believe is either June 1 or July 1 when all of the letter writers have to be confirmed and submitted. But I remember the date being very well down the road. Most of the action had happened about a month and a half before then. And then generally speaking, the full dossier is due in August to your unit. It will be due from your unit to your school in early to mid-September. And then from there, the one fixed date, the reason I'm giving you general guidelines is because all of the schools and the units work backwards individually from the one fixed date, which is December 1. That's when everything goes from the schools to campus. So it's December 1 working backward. If you have extra layers of review, you can anticipate that your deadline will be a little bit sooner. And that's the formalized part of the timeline. But most people start working to get materials together in February, March, at the very latest April of the spring semester before. There are some units that do a fall review, and this is why I say go check, because there are some that start much sooner than that. I think I've covered what I wanted to cover in terms of the process and the criteria and how the dossier is evaluated. So we will cut the